Okay, so I'm out on the salt marshes this afternoon where I live on the Isle of Wight, and it's a very, very cold day, but it's been sunny. As you can see, the sun is beginning to set now, and I'm just thinking about those mysterious Magi, those figures from of old that make that long journey from Persia, perhaps our current day Iran or Iraq, to Bethlehem to find the newborn king, following that star, that natal birth star. And as I stand with the sun setting behind me, they would have been walking westwards, wouldn't they? Westwards towards Israel. Well, it seems very likely that they were astrologers. They studied the stars with maps and mathematics, very clever men, and they studied the patterns and what the stars were likely to do. But in those days, people also believed that different stars meant different things, and this particular star they believed was a birth star, and that it was telling of someone incredibly important had just been born. Beginning of the service, I read out to you some verses from Isaiah 60. Arise, shine, for your light has come, for the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. And it speaks of God's light dawning out of the darkness, of exiles returning to Israel, and the fortunes of the land being restored after many years of captivity. And it's this verse 6, which talks about kings coming to the brightness of the rising of God's people, and camels from Midian bringing riches from the furthest parts of the known world. I think because of this verse in Isaiah, which is often read at this time of year, the time of Epiphany, when we think about the journey of the three kings, because of this we think of them as kings, but there's actually nothing in the Gospels to suggest that they were kings at all. They are simply called Magi, wise men or magicians, astrologers. More than one. There could have been 2, there could have been 3, 4 or 5, who knows. And you can hear the wild geese honking to one another. I just wonder what sights and sounds those ancient travellers must have seen on their journey. Although I don't think it was winter. That's another fallacy of these lovely Christmas carols that we like. In the bleak midwinter, I don't think it was winter at all. I think it was probably around the time of Passover, because they had sheep out in the fields, didn't they? And these wise men, they weren't part of God's flock as the Jewish people saw themselves to be. They were foreigners. They would have been viewed as pagans, would have been thought of as very, very suspect. But here's the amazing thing. God spoke to them. They were open to God. They saw that star and they knew that they had to follow it. They knew what it meant and they followed it. And when they get to Herod's palace, of course, and ask about the king of the Jews, the scribes and Pharisees come over from the temple in Jerusalem, and they get out their books and they find this Old Testament prophecy in Micah saying something like, oh, Bethlehem, you know, you're so tiny, but you're not the least of the towns in Judea, for out of you will come this great and mighty leader who will save and shepherd my people Israel. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but this put King Herod into quite a spin. He was very insecure about his position. Hardly surprising, because it was rather tenuous. He was really a puppet king. He shouldn't really have been there at all, and he was being ruled over by the Romans, and so Herod gets very, very insecure. The Messiah has come after all these years of captivity by the Romans and occupation and hardship and grief. You think they would have been elated, but actually it says in the passage that the whole of Jerusalem was in an uproar. Well, I expect by the whole of Jerusalem they mean the court, the great and the good, not ordinary people. But it's interesting, isn't it, that those same priests and scribes who go to advise Herod are not interested themselves in seeking the baby king so that they could worship, and that it takes these outsiders come from such a long way away to come and search and discover and worship the baby king. You see, it was always God's intention that Israel was to be a light to the darkness. They were supposed to lead the other nations to God, so that they too would be brought into that divine embrace. And there again, it's as if God is just showing us that he chooses who he wants to be his people, and that he is much more interested in people's hearts and minds than in their status or their background or their family or their race. And yet you've got these Magi, and they just seem to be much more in tune with the Holy Spirit than the priests and the people from the temple. It's just amazing, isn't it, really? They know what to do. They follow the star, they find the baby, and then the Holy Spirit warns them in a dream not to go back to Herod, that Herod will try to kill the baby Jesus, and so they outsmart him by going home another way. And I think I'll be having to make my way home now, because it's getting very chilly here.